What is architecture?
I think one could imagine architecture as being a professional service or a disciplinary discourse. I think everybody I know somehow works in between those two edges of the spectrum of architecture at different scales, with different clients or with different association with schools. When you think about professional services, I guess you answer a need for a human habitation, but at the same time, I think architecture is able to create a background to a collective imagination. I mean, whether or not we like it, I think architecture makes up for 90% of the background of any human activity, and therefore it's not just answering certain needs or certain political situations, but also enters the cultural product of humanity. So I guess architecture becomes quite important as a discipline when it becomes a discussion about how you answer these cultural needs and how do you then create or participate in this imaginary process that is the one that creates a background to our lives. Therefore, I think there is something about architecture that is quite difficult to pinpoint into one only scale or into only one dimensions, because of the changes in culture and the changes in needs, the changes in imagination, the changes in society are quite fast, and I think architecture somehow is part of making them or following them.
What can architecture do?
I think architecture can answer many design needs and can also inspire many different creative outlet for humankind. I think there is extreme architecture, the one that has extreme engineering in it, that somehow is part of an extreme intelligence and push of humankind to surpass problems. And then there's, I think, a much more ephemeral, weak architecture that has the ability to create nuanced variations within the normal life. So I think somehow architects find their path within those possibilities, and I think every architect somehow will give you different answers to this. They're very banal and broad questions in many ways, and not very easy to answer that way, because I think the spectrum is so wide.
What is your architectural position?
Probably my architectural position is more on the ephemeral side of architecture rather than totalizing side of architecture, meaning that I'm always looking at the relationship between architecture and the audience, and which is quite important in my practice, and the idea that the audience can actually find a place, a private moment into a public space. What we work mainly in this office are public projects, usually are public art projects that usually take place in the facade of a building or in a lobby or even a small object. There is always a sense of relationship between the human scale and the projects we're working with. I find that relationships enriching, and somehow also a small critique about the autonomy of architecture being such without the need of an audience. I think actually the theatricality of architecture is where most of my projects rotate around. They try to find within the theatrical aspect of architecture, which I think actually architects master in a great way. They try to find novel forms of relationships. So a lot of the work we do is based on optical effects, graphics, and creating this level of complexity of viewing, and somehow challenge what maybe people expect to see in architecture.
What is your design method?
I guess my practice has been always quite flirtatious with tools and techniques since the beginning. Maybe it's generational. anybody my age, which I will not declare, went to school at a specific time where there was a big digital revolution. And I think if part of my education was completely analog, the second part of my education was completely digital, which meant that at that point there was some kind of sort of enthusiasm towards tools and what they could do in terms of architecture. I think those tools somehow are now new normal. Everybody has them. So they became part of our palette. I think the office quite fluid among them. And in a way, the tools became only a part of a larger set of techniques that operates within analog and digital now. And I think those methodology of work and that kind of curiosity, it is still quite part of the way of making and designing. Although clearly the office is expanded and there are other people that work on those designs, I find that everybody somehow that is in this office has a keen eye and a keen relationship with the making of architecture through creative workflows. Methodologies, partially I think is part. Clients give you some level of boundaries and things you respond to. I think that's whether or not architects like to admit it, it is part of the methodology of work to be able to listen to a project, which is a set of site client program conditions, and finding a way to create a language that answers a very complex situation. I think the methodology of finding a network of design solutions that are ingrained in the identity of the office and still have an interface with the rest of the world is quite important to me, yes.